Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
Look, Gavin, all I'm saying is that Threads, it was a little much, man. It was a little much. Ass.
The following podcast contains
profanity, boob jokes, and tired comedy references.
Explicit language.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that asks a simple question. When you set national security policy based on a made-for-TV movie, what the hell were you thinking? I'm your host, Dave Bledsoe, and this episode number 471, Danger Zone Part 2, the day after edition of the show, where we talk about an ABC movie of the week that traumatized a generation of Americans in 1983 with nightmares of nuclear oblivion. Stay tuned. What the Hell Are You Thinking podcast is brought to you by the Ground Zero Experience, the apocalyptic escape room. When you're tired of the same old escape room, solve a puzzle, find a key, get right out, you're ready for Ground Zero Experience. You and your group are locked in a vault with a ticking clock and a simulated nuclear weapon. You must find the clues to disarm the weapon before it goes off, killing everyone. The catch is if you don't disarm it in time, it releases real radioactive isotopes. The zest of real radiation will give your group the kind of motivation no other escape experience can offer. The Ground Zero Experience. Solve the mysteries, save the world, and yourselves. Ground Zero Experience contains live radioactive material, though at a non-lethal level that could cause long-term damage to sensitive tissues. All group participants must sign a waiver of medical clearance and liability for participation. See our website for details.
159er. Union Yeshing. First tower, voice 6-1.
NATO intelligence sources report a massive buildup.
590. Clear for takeoff on lane 5.
Clear ground.
External post check 9.
The President is presently in direct communication.
Privilege of blue. Back launch missed at this time.
3 Soviet tactics deployed.
Current world intelligence situation, and you might pay particular note to the nuclear submarines off the east and west coast.
Having already captured NATO advanced positions.
Hey, any of you guys hear anything about an alert?
I really don't think either side wants to be the first to use a nuclear device.
It's not a question of who, but where.
East Germany sealed off the borders to West Berlin.
It's not gonna happen.
Four principal West German access corridors.
You're crazy, but not that crazy.
I don't believe this is happening.
We have a massive attack against the U.S. at this time. ICBMs. Over 300 missiles inbound now.
Either we fired first and they're gonna try to hit what's left. But they fired first and we just got our missiles out of the ground in time.
This is not an exercise.
Millisecond takes you beyond imagining, beyond tomorrow, and into the day after.
You want to know a little secret about nuclear weapons?
Are you sure this is legal?
Huh? Oh, no, not that kind of secret about nuclear. I don't even know those kind of secrets. I'm talking about something that most people wouldn't know unless they were ever in close proximity to an actual nuclear weapon.
Okay, go ahead.
They're not that impressive. I mean, sure, you would think, oh my God, I'm standing next to a bomb that obliterates thousands of people in an instant, but pretty soon, it's just a very inconvenient piece of equipment that is forcing you to do a lot of extra work.
Such a pain in the ass.
You can't even be alone with the bomb. Not because, God forbid, you should try to steal that several hundred to several thousand pound hunk of metal, or you try to set it off, because both of those things are damn near impossible to do, but because they are desperately afraid you might have a camera snuggled up your ass and you'll take a picture of it. Yeah, almost all the security around a nuclear weapon is to make sure you don't get information to sell to our enemies.
Kind of makes sense.
Not when you consider the Soviets already had all that information for years and it came from way higher up the food chain than some jackass 19-year-old airman turning nuts on a flight line in bumfuck North Dakota. But that's the whole story of how the U.S. military went around protecting its nuclear assets. A little bit from external forces, a whole lot from its own people. And we didn't want to be around the damn things in the first place. The worst days I worked in the Air Force were because of those fucking things, because they were out of their hard and secure shelters and being dragged around the flight line to be put on bombers. If they had just left the damn things locked up, they wouldn't have to worry about Airman First Class Snuffy with an Instamatic in his asshole taking blurry snapshots of the firing mechanism a KGB agent bought decades ago from one of the people who designed it when it was being designed.
That seems problematic.
Yeah, but not for me. My problem is the damn bombs and the missiles I have. Now I'm standing in the cold fucking rain, 12, 14 hours at a pop, because they aren't locked up safe, because we have to practice blowing up the goddamn world. I mean, you can't wipe out all life on Earth 3 times over without practicing. Which brings me to this week's topic. That time in 1983, when America got a good long look at what the end of the world might look like, for which we had put in all that practice. And they did not like it. It's a what the hell movie night.
Movie night!
That's Ruby Valley, Movie Hollywood, where any office boy or young mechanic can be a panic with just a good-looking pan. And any barmaid can be a star maid if she dances with or without a plan. Hooray for Hollywood, where you're terrific if you're even good, where anyone at all from Shirley Temple to Amy Semple.
So, what are we watching?
1983's ABC made-for-TV movie, The Day After. As I mentioned last week, in the late 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union entered a period of relative stability called détente. After the turbulence of the late 50s and the early 60s, the two superpowers had decided, without really talking about the issue, that instead of pushing the world to the brink of annihilation and killing everyone, they would take a different approach. They would get a bunch of poor brown people to kill each other on their behalves. You know.
Just because they're brown.
So our squabbles were settled in what we call proxy wars. Sometimes we would send over some of our soldiers, many of them brown people, to die in these proxy wars just to prove to the other side that we were serious about them. But for the white folks in the USSR and the United States, we could take a breather from all the end-of-the-world rhetoric we'd heard, and white people were like,
"This is nice. This is nice."
And for about a decade until, he showed up.
Say his name!
Ronald Reagan was elected.
He said it! He said it!
Without retreading too much of part one, which you should listen to because it's relevant, things got tense for white people again. I mean, we didn't stop having brown people fight and die on our behalf.
Well, why would we do that?
We just added back in the threat of global destruction to the mix. And unlike nuclear fears of the 50s and 60s, the anxiety of all life on Earth ending almost instantly was not faced with a stoic face and grim resolution that it was better to be dead than red. Those of us in the 1980s had a rather different take on the issue entirely.
Or we could not do that.
Young people in particular felt that mutually assured destruction, the doctrine that if both sides knew the other side could utterly destroy everything many, many times over, they would never fire their missiles first. We felt that that might not be the best way to address global tensions.
But maybe if we talk about it, we could...
Unfortunately for us, the people in power on both sides of the issue were pretty adamant.
No, none of that.
All you can have is fear and paranoia, and by God, you were lucky to have that. So all we had left was expressing our fears through popular culture, music and television primarily. A lot of people listen to 80s music today and think those songs were about fucking, and a lot of them were, but the subtext was that we were fucking so much because we were worried the world was about to end.
Yes, I see it.
But on television, we couldn't just make shows about fucking. I mean, we did. See episode number 378 for more about that.
That's a plug.
But neither did we come right out and express our existential fear of nuclear Armageddon in episodes of Barney Miller. But as things grew increasingly scarier, some people in Hollywood decided to flout long-established norms for television and came right out and said that maybe this whole nuclear war thing might not be a good idea.
And it was very brave.
Look, television was many things: juvenile, tacky, pandering, terrified to offend advertisers, but brave, it's not. So it took a lot for a television network to risk scaring off, or worse, offending large swaths of older Americans who grew up believing that, without question, that anything that showed fear toward the Soviets was the same as installing a communist dictatorship in D.C. Nowadays, those of us alive in the 80s know how laughable that was. I mean, We're not interested in installing a communist dictatorship. We want a fascist dictatorship in D.C., allied with our former enemies, the communists.
Great job, guys.
So let's give credit to ABC for showing some real intestinal fortitude in choosing to pay for, produce, and air the movie that I'm now finally ready to talk about.
Finally, about damn time.
The film was the brainchild of ABC Motion Pictures president Brandon Stoddard, the king of the TV miniseries. Stoddard brought adaptations of Alex Haley's Roots and Herman Wouk's The Winds of War to the small screen. Stoddard had seen the big screen movie The China Syndrome, a little movie about nuclear reactor meltdowns that was long on drama and short on facts, and then decided that nuclear war...
Well, it is kind of a bad thing.
And then commissioned veteran TV writer Edwin Hume, whose credits include Cannon, Barnaby Jones, and The Streets of San Francisco.
What? I'm a mom. I love those shows.
To pen a script about a small town consumed by the fiery fist of the nuclear gods of war. Hume eschewed the political intrigues and stirring action adventure and focused the script on families impacted, crafting characters deliberately to reflect contemporary Americans as viewed through television.
White people.
Amen. White people.
Director Nicholas Meyer, who had just finished directing a little movie based on another TV show.
At the end of the universe lies the beginning of vengeance. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Took on the film with little confidence the movie would ever make it through the censors for broadcast. It was Meyer that brought such intense realism and accuracy to the film. Allegedly, what he learned about the impacts of nuclear war made him physically ill and filled him with existential dread, which was great for the movie, not so great for his hope for a happy future for the human race.
Understandable.
When the film was ready, it had problems finding advertisers who rightly felt that people might not so much want to buy a Pepsi after being reminded so starkly that they and everyone they loved could die suddenly and without warning in a fiery blast of nuclear fury. But once they were shown the film, they sort of changed their minds, and some of them were said to have broken down in tears.
Allegedly.
Yeah, I find that hard to believe, too. On November 20th, 1983, 41 years ago, the week this podcast drops, the film premiered on a Sunday night. November Sundays were not without good television that year. From the Hollywood Reporter, quote, Americans had a lot of choices about what to watch on TV the night of November 20th, 1983. On CBS, they could enjoy an evening of sitcoms, beginning with Alice.
Early to rise, early to bed. And in between, I cooked and cleaned and went out of my head.
Or The Jeffersons.
Well, we're moving on now, to the east side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky. Moving on to the east side, we finally got a piece of the pie.
Then Goodnight Beantown. Yeah, I don't remember that one either. Before they finally wrapped up with primetime viewing with an episode of Trapper John, MD. Not gonna lie, pod friends, to this day, I still kind of want to live like Gonzo in a dilapidated RV named Titanic in a hospital parking lot. And across the dial on NBC, there was part 1 of Kennedy, a 5-hour miniseries in which Martin Sheen put on a thick as chowder Boston accent to portray, for a change, a president not named Bartlett, unquote. The plot of the movie, The Day After, focuses on 3 primary point-of-view characters in and around Kansas City, Missouri. It opens with Americans going through the motions of day-to-day life in their small towns. Background to all this are constant news stories of escalation of tensions in Europe as the Soviets and the United States inch towards conflict centered on Berlin. Without digressing too much, we widely assume that the divided city of Berlin would be the flashpoint for World War III, largely because it had already been the flashpoint for World War III several times. It just never quite kicked off. Other characters were regular folks, farmers, small-town families, and interestingly enough, a young Air Force airman who's a technician on a nuclear missile silo. Another digression.
Naturally.
This movie got a lot of military stuff right. The Defense Department didn't help because the producers would not agree to their demand that the movie say the Soviets fired first. There were errors, naturally, largely because so much of the nuclear war plan was and is secret, but as someone who's stationed at a nuke base just a few years after the movie, and I can say this movie did better than some of the propaganda movies the Reagan Department of Defense did actually help out with. After the Warsaw Pact blockades Berlin, NATO tries to force the blockade and triggers World War III, which rapidly goes from conventional to nuclear. About halfway through the movie, the missiles begin to launch, and a few minutes later, the missiles from the USSR arrive doing what nuclear missiles do. And the final third of the film focuses on the immediate aftermath of the nuclear strike, ending with a scratchy radio message from the president saying, "The war is over and help is on the way." But the president said that America did not surrender our values. The final scenes of the movie are, well...
It's a post-nuke dystopia, thank you.
Featuring little things like people being executed by the National Guard for looting, horribly burned figures shambling around in the ruins of what was once a city, and folks dying horribly from radiation poisoning. And the screen fades to black as the Morse code for MAD, mutually assured destruction, beeps out as the credits roll. There was also a brief post-credit addition where the producers remind the viewers that this is a work of fiction, and that had this been a real nuclear attack, then it would...
something much, much worse.
To a modern audience, The Day After comes across as, okay, overly sincere, a touch melodramatic, and...
even hokey.
But in the 1980s, hokey was how you conveyed sincerity. Quoting from the New York Times in a 1983 article, quote, "Since this program may be so upsetting, we think it might be best to be watched in families or groups of families. It probably shouldn't be seen by children under 12 and definitely by not by children in isolation. The program is The Day After, a 2-hour and 15-minute ABC movie that will be shown November 20th. The Institute discussion was one of manifestation of the extraordinary concern expressed in recent weeks by family experts, psychological professionals, and educators over the potential impact of the movie on children and parents as well. The Day After, which ABC executives say is the most harrowing film ever made for the home screen, stars Jason Robards, JoBeth Williams, John Cullinan, and John Lithgow. It will be shown in primetime viewing hours at 8 p.m. Eastern States. The ABC officials have announced that their purpose in making the movie that graphically depicts the effects of nuclear war. It is our hope that The Day After will inspire the nations of this earth and their people and their leaders to find means to avert that fateful day, said Brandon Stoddard, president of ABC Motion Pictures, unquote. Pod friends, people fucking watched. ABC had spared no expense in promoting the film with teaser commercials, which is how we began the show, that started months before the air date. And they printed up 500,000 viewer guides, and those were distributed to churches, civic organizations, or just anybody who asked for one. And they asked hard-hitting questions that you were supposed to answer from your watching the movie. And these are all actual questions from the viewer guide, which I have linked in the show notes. Like, should developments in the escalating military situation of Germany have convinced citizens in the Kansas City area that a war was imminent? How much attention do you pay to military conflicts overseas? When was the last time you followed the details of an international crisis out of concern for your own safety and well-being of your loved ones? How did you act? Or at what point in the 2 days prior to the attack would you have abandoned business as usual and taken protective courses of action for your family? If you had warning of an impending disaster, what would you do? Or questions like, what do you know about the mission and operations of the United States Air Force's Strategic Air Command? How its chain of command is organized? What would be SAC's role during a nuclear war? More from the New York Times, quote, in letters and telephone calls and quiet discussions of contentious gatherings, millions of Americans talked yesterday of fear, hope, and the horrors of nuclear war that they had seen dramatized on television Sunday night. Preliminary estimates were that 100 million Americans, more than half the nation's adult population, watched the ABC TV movie The Day After, which depicted the annihilation of Kansas City and the nightmarish aftermath 38 miles away in Lawrence, Kansas. The movie had been preceded by weeks of heavy publicity and public debate, and the audience figures, which were ABC based on ratings by the AC Nielsen Company for 6 major cities, appeared to make the day after the second most watched dramatic program in history, surpassed only by the 106 million viewers who watched the last episode of MASH on CBS last February 28th.
Is that a lot?
That's a lot.
The Super Bowl in 1983 had 20 million fewer viewers. It's like a Ruhr but different than the day after. Everyone was talking about it, and, well, mostly they just pretended it could never happen because more from the Times. Quote, while expressions of fear and frustration were common, some polls afterwards suggested that the film had not generated a wide shift of opinion among those who support nuclear arms control or among those who favor maintaining strong nuclear deterrent. One poll found that Americans overwhelmingly believed that a nuclear war could be avoided, unquote. Because you see, Americans are very good at ignoring things we find to be distasteful or inconvenient, or if we had to do something about them in any small way that would take an effort, we just don't want to do it. See the most recent election. But in some small corners of life, this movie had a profound impact. Again, more from the Times. Quote, thousands of telephone calls were received by stations that broadcast the program, by the White House and by the news media. In addition to special telephone hotlines that were operating in several cities to take calls from people frightened by the movie, some of the most poignant emotions aroused by the film unfolded immediately after its showing. At the South Presbyterian Church in Dobbs Ferry, New York, where 150 people had gathered to watch on a large screen, some sobbed quietly afterwards. Others held hands or hugged one another for emotional support. I'm really scared, said Elizabeth Wilson, a high school student who was led crying from the auditorium. I just almost have the feeling that there's no hope, she said later. I'm scared. I'm really scared. I want to be with some people I really love. The church's minister, the Reverend John Gilmore, said, those policy planners who thought that the balance of the fear was a stable state were wrong. Fear has backed into this very room on this very night. In Lawrence, Kansas, where 500 people joined a candlelight peace vigil Sunday night, 100 people gathered yesterday for a town meeting organized by a disarmament group. Meantime, a dozen people held a counter demonstration marching across the University of Kansas campus in support of President Reagan's nuclear arms policy, unquote. To be sure, there had long been anti-nuke groups going all the way back to the 1950s.
A bunch of card-carrying commies, you ask me.
But they were decidedly fringe, proto-hippies and then actual hippies. During the 70s, a Christian group called the Plowshares began, and in the 80s was a real thorn in the side of U.S. nuclear forces. The Plowshares were a frequent boogeyman of my first posting in a nuke base in Arkansas. We were far more worried about a group of nuns sleeping past and pouring some paint on a nuclear warhead than any foreign agents or terrorist groups. Our annual readiness drills on the base for base security almost always were about that scenario versus any kind of foreign threat. But starting in the 80s, largely because of this movie, larger organizations began to protest. They were most common in Europe, where the idea of a limited nuclear exchange had always been on the table. And for them, it was pretty laughable because that limited exchange was in their backyard, and that didn't make it very limited for them. And then more and more protest groups began here in the States. They started making noise and were promptly ignored by the Reagan administration. After all, if the Reagan administration could ignore gay men dying of AIDS, throwing their bodies in traffic to raise attention for a global epidemic, what chance did a bunch of aging hippies and nuns outside an Air Force main gate have?
Bunch of goddamn fucking hippies.
Reagan did see the movie before it was released. And legend says that when Reagan saw the movie, his heart
grew 3 sizes that day.
Going back to the Hollywood Reporter quote, that's an historical pivot point worth lingering over for a moment. The network that cooked up the Love Boat and Three's Company that introduced the world to Donnie and Marie and Love American Style may very well have saved the planet from nuclear annihilation. I've come to believe that's true, says Nicholas Meyer, 77, who directed the 3-hour film. The movie may have indeed helped prevent a nuclear war. It certainly changed one person's mind on the subject, and that person just happened to be the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, who wrote about watching the movie in his memoir. His biographer, who spent 3 years in the White House, and said the only time that he ever saw Reagan flip out was after seeing the movie. Ultimately, it sent Reagan into such a tailspin that he signed the Intermediate Range Missile Treaty, the only treaty that ever resulted in the physical dismantling of nuclear weapons, unquote. By the way, those weapons were the Pershing missiles that damn near caused fucking World War III in 1983 because of the Able Archer exercise. Like I said, Reagan did see the movie about 3 weeks before it was released, and this is what he wrote the day he saw it on October 10th, 1983, in his personal diary. This is the literal exact words of Ronald Wilson Reagan, President of the United States, who was supposedly, according to the legend, so very moved and traumatized and horrified by what he saw in the day after. Quote, Columbus Day. In the morning at Camp D, I ran the tape of the ABC movie ABC is running on the air November 20th. It's called The Day After. It has Lawrence, Kansas wiped out in a nuclear war with Russia. It's powerfully done, all $7 million worth. First hint that he's not really taking this that seriously is his concern is how much the network spent to make the fucking movie. But back to Ronnie. It's very effective and left me greatly depressed. So far, they haven't sold any of the 25 spot ad schedule, and I can see why. If Ronald Reagan were the president of a fucking television network, this would be a relevant statement as to this fucking alleged trauma he experienced from seeing it. Whether it will be of any help to the anti-nukes or not, I can't say. Again, not talking about being traumatized by the death, destruction, and the just sheer fucking stupidity of nuclear war. He's worried about the political ramifications of it. My own reaction was one of having to do all we can to have a deterrent and see that there is never a nuclear war. Deterrent is Reagan speak for we have to have more missiles, bombs, and submarines with nuclear weapons on them, unquote. And again, as we quoted last week, 2 days before the movie released, on the day Reagan found out just how fucking close we had been for like a week prior to that to nuclear war, this is what he wrote in his goddamn diary after allegedly being so moved by the movie and finding out that we almost all just died in a nuclear Armageddon. Quote, George is going on ABC right after its big nuclear bomb film Sunday night. We know it's anti-nuke propaganda, but we're going to take it over and say it shows why we must keep on doing what we're doing, unquote. Now, I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem to me that Ronnie was all that depressed since he was talking about going to spin the movie to prop up his building more goddamn nuclear fucking weapons. But hey, I'm not a political scientist or a star in B movies with a fucking chimpanzee. But that was the legend that came out of all this. According to Time magazine, which in the 80s was a right-wing magazine and today is just a clickbait piece of shit, quote, by early 1984, Reagan's speeches had veered from warmonger to Gandhi-esque peacemaker. No, they didn't. Declaring, we're all God's children. His administration was charged with developing stronger diplomatic ties with the Soviet colleagues, securing disarmament summits, and even installing a fax hotline between the Oval Office and the Kremlin. Along with the rise of a new Soviet leader, these strategies set the stage for the end of the superpowered atomic arms race, at least in the 20th century, unquote. So, what really had happened was that Reagan and his boys had gotten his military-industrial complex a series of locked-in deals for just an ungodly amount of money spent on nuclear weapons and conventional weapons. Reading now from armscontrol.org, quote, in October 1981, he unveiled his plan for a major strategic modernization program to add thousands of additional warheads and a variety of new delivery systems to the U.S. arsenal while improving U.S. command and control capabilities. The strategic package, which in large part built on previous programs, called for a big increase in bomber forces, including 100 B-1Bs and the development of stealth bombers and a new land-based 10-warhead strategic missile, the MX, and a new intermediate-range missile deployments in Europe. In addition, he proposed deploying more than 3,000 air-launched cruise missiles on bombers. Reagan called for accelerated development and deployment of the Trident II D5, the submarine-launched ballistic missile and sea-launched cruise missile, unquote. American jingoism loves to paint Reagan as the great savior, the man who brought Moscow to the table and made them capitulate, thus winning the Cold War for America.
I do love America.
Now, call me a dirty commie.
Filthy bastard commies!
But it seems to me that the guy who did the most to cool things down and keep the world from being blown to irradiated shit was Mikhail Gorbachev. He's the one that took all the risks to open up the Soviet Union. All Reagan did was sell arms to Iran and fund right-wing terrorists while slowly growing more and more demented. But hey, what do I know? I only lived through it, and I don't write smug treatises for right-wing think tanks.
Call me drunk.
I don't know. Maybe Gorby saw the movie when it did air in the Soviet Union in 1987, and it changed his mind. But definitely sure that it really didn't fucking impact Ronald Reagan that much. And this movie is one of those Generation X pop culture moments that shaped our childhoods. Now, I didn't see the movie until a couple of years later when I was back stateside from Guam, and my high school civics teacher, yeah, we used to have people back then that taught things like civics. Well, he showed it in class, and needless to say, I was a little alarmed.
Why would you show me this?
I mean, my dad had given me the talk years before.
About the birds and the bees?
No. It was about how if the bombs came, we were all going to die and go to heaven and be with Jesus.
It's not very comforting.
No, it wasn't, but it was more comforting than the time he did talk to me about sex, because that was really unpleasant and awkward. But the kids back in 83 remember that Sunday night vividly. I put the question to the Gen X subreddit, and the generational trauma, still very present. Here are just a few of the more raw responses I called from that thread. User DanceGoddess71 said, quote, "That was the year that I started checking out books on radiation poisoning and asking my dad if we could move closer to Chicago since I figured they'd get wiped out quick and painless," unquote. User this is 66 said, quote, "I had nightmares about this movie for months and after watching it. I would wake up screaming and I'd sleep on the floor in my sister's bedroom," unquote. User Bucket of Bits said, quote, "I'm 51 years old and I'm still traumatized," unquote. And user Mozzie Killer said, quote, "Growing up in the northern part of the United States, I was convinced every night that the Ruskies would be launching soon after I fell asleep, and we would be hit first being closer to the Canadian border. I said a thank you to SAC to keep us safe until morning. They always did. Peace was their profession. Not sure why I assumed they'd launch at night. I just think that some of my fears were based on seeing an actual ICBM silo in North Dakota and Montana driving to my grandparents' house," unquote. Pod friends, I was a reluctant SAC warrior for about 3 years. And I assure you that peace of our profession might have been the motto of SAC, but the actual business of SAC was to turn this entire planet into a smoking, irradiated ember at a moment's goddamn notice. And the movie's impact on the boomers who grew up with a fucking turtle telling them that everything would be okay if they just curled into a small ball underneath their desk.
Dum dum, diddle dum dum, diddle dum dum, diddle dum dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and cover, duck and cover.
The movie was a massive shock to their placid middle-class smugness that, yes, Virginia, there really was a nuclear Santa who would bring death and destruction to all the boys and girls. And more than that, it reminded them of the Cuban Missile Crisis and how fucked up that was, and even made them question whether or not Saint Reagan might not be as all-wise and knowing as he was supposed to be. For a little while. For like less than a year, because the next year in 1984, they re-elected Ronald Reagan in a landslide victory that is still the most fucking electoral ass stomping in fucking U.S. history. So yeah, the day after might have scared the shit out of a bunch of preteen Gen Xers, but it did fuck all to ease the tensions in the Cold War. You want to know what actually melted the Cold War? It was a younger guy becoming the leader of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev, and he did a lot. He took all the risk, and he opened glasnost, perestroika. These are all things that I'll talk about eventually in some distant podcast. But I want you to know, pod friends, the reason Mikhail did this was not because he was afraid of the end of the war or because he saw the day after. He just really liked Pizza Hut.
Это Горбачев.
Горбачев?
Это из-за него у нас в экономике бардак.
Да благодаря ему у нас новые возможности.
Это из-за него у нас политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас свобода.
Полный хаос.
Перспективы.
Политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас есть писахат.
За Горбачева!
За Горбачева!
За Горбачева!
Sometimes nothing brings people together like a nice hot pizza from Pizza Hut.
Although I guess, honestly, because most of you don't speak Russian, that didn't make a whole lot of sense to y'all. Gorby did a Pizza Hut commercial in 1998.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Spotify.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
That is it for the show this week. You know, I planned these 2 shows because I had a sneaking suspicion we need to take our mind off the election, and boy, was I right. Just for all the wrong reasons. I just wanted people to know that we'd been in rough spots before and we made it out fine, so we'll probably be fine now.
You're not fooling anybody.
No, I guess I'm not, and we're well and truly fucked. And hey, since we're all fucked, you don't need money, so, and I still do, because whiskey ain't cheap, so kick us $1 at patreon.com/whatthehellpodcast. Please use the website, never use the app. It saves us both money, and keeps that money out of Apple's pocket. Fuck Apple. Do all the things that Jeremy tells you to do in the closing credits, otherwise he'll be forced to make me watch the UK movie Threads, which was way fucking scarier than the day after. And so for me, Dave, I was hanging out at this little toy shop and I bought this bag of balloons Bledsoe. Producer,
I don't know what the old way was. We clearly could have won a nuclear war with the Warsaw Pact.
Gavin! And all the fictional people in the fallout shelters who want to say, this song really should have been on the soundtrack for the movie. I mean, it was out in 1983 when the movie was made. And we'll see you all right after Thanksgiving break for brand new shows. Enjoy your holiday, pod friends.
What the Hell Were You Thinking stars Dave Bledsoe and features Gavin St. James and several fictional minions. The show is produced by Kimberly Steele and a part of the Seltzer Kings podcast network. You can find more information on the show on their website, whatthehellpodcast.com, or on Twitter at @thehell_podcast, or on Facebook as What the Hell Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I have no ending for this, so I take a small bow.
Oh yes, I can see it now. It's a helicopter, and it's coming this way. A helicopter? It's flying something behind it. I can't quite make it out. It's a large banner, and it says, Happy Thanksgiving from W.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts